I found the anonymous letter taped to my mailbox on a Tuesday morning in late September, and the words made my coffee taste like battery acid. The message was typed on plain white paper, but someone had gone over certain words with a thick black marker for emphasis. "Your yard is a disgrace," it read. "Fix it or face the consequences. You have been warned." No signature, no return address, just those menacing words that seemed to vibrate with barely contained rage. I stood there on my front lawn in Naperville, Illinois, staring at the paper while my neighbor's sprinklers hissed in the early morning quiet. My name is Marcus Webb, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision for exactly 8 months. The house was a modest 3-bedroom colonial with blue siding that my wife Jennifer and I had scraped together every penny to afford. We had a 7-year-old daughter named Sophie who loved the big backyard, and honestly, I thought we had finally made it. The American dream and all that. The yard in question was perfectly fine by any reasonable standard. Sure, there was a small patch of crabgrass near the driveway that I had been meaning to address, and maybe the hedge along the property line could use a trim, but calling it a disgrace seemed like a massive overreach. I crumpled the letter in my fist and headed inside, figuring it was just some crank with too much time on their hands. Jennifer was feeding Sophie breakfast when I walked into the kitchen. "Everything okay?" she asked, noting my expression. "Just some weirdo leaving notes," I said, tossing the crumpled paper onto the counter. "Apparently our yard offends someone's delicate sensibilities." She smoothed out the letter and read it, her eyebrows rising. "That's intense. Do you think it's the HOA, the HOA?" Those 3 letters had become a source of low-grade anxiety since we moved in. The Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association was run by a board of 5 residents, but everyone knew the real power lay with one person, Patricia Hendricks, the board president. Patricia was a woman in her mid-50s with helmet-like blonde hair and the kind of smile that never quite reached her eyes. She drove a white Lexus SUV and could often be seen prowling the neighborhood with a clipboard, documenting violations like a parking enforcement officer on commission. "I don't know," I said. "If it was official HOA business, wouldn't they send it on letterhead, with their logo and all that?" "You would think," Jennifer agreed. She glanced at the clock. "I have to get Sophie to school." "But maybe you should mention it to some of the neighbors. See if anyone else got something similar." That seemed reasonable, so after they left, I decided to do a little reconnaissance. I started with Bill Morrison, who lived 3 houses down. Bill was a retired postal worker with a dry sense of humor and an impressive garden that he tended with the dedication of a museum curator. If anyone would know about weird mail incidents, it would be him. I found him outside, deadheading roses with a pair of small shears. "Morning, Marcus," he called out as I approached. "What brings you by?" I showed him the letter. His expression darkened as he read it. "Son of a gun," he muttered. "I got one too 3 days ago." My stomach dropped. "You did? What did yours say?" Bill disappeared into his garage and returned with a similar piece of paper. His message was slightly different but just as threatening. "Your fence violates community standards. Remove IT or you will regret IT. This is your final warning." "My fence has been here for 6 years," Bill said, his voice tight with frustration. "It's 4 feet tall, made of white vinyl and approved by the HOA when I installed it. There's not a damn thing wrong with it." We compared the letters. Both were typed, both had certain words emphasized with black marker, both had the same aggressive tone. "Have you told anyone else?" I asked. "I mentioned it to Donna Chen across the street." "She got one too, something about her flower pots being an eyesore." Bill shook his head. "This is getting out of hand." "Patricia Hendricks has been on a warpath lately, but even for her, this seems extreme." "You think it's Patricia? Who else would it be?" She's been complaining about my fence for months, saying it blocks the sight line from the street. Never mind that there's nothing in the HOA bylaws about sight lines. Bill's jaw clenched. I tried to be diplomatic, but the woman doesn't understand the concept of compromise. I spent the rest of the morning talking to neighbors. By lunchtime, I had confirmed that 6 households in total had received threatening letters. Besides Bill, Donna, and myself, there was Michael Torres, who got accused of having an unsightly basketball hoop in his driveway. There was elderly Mrs. Elena Kowalski, whose crime was letting her grass grow a 1/4 inch too tall. And there was the young couple at the end of the block, Tyler and Amanda Brooks, who were apparently in violation for having a decorative garden gnome that someone deemed inappropriate. All 6 letters had the same format, the same aggressive tone, the same emphasis with black marker. None were signed. We decided to meet that evening at Bill's house to figure out our next move. Jennifer came with me, and by 7 o'clock, Bill's living room was packed with frustrated homeowners. The atmosphere was tense, but also oddly energizing. There's something about shared grievance that brings people together. Okay, let's establish the facts, Bill said, taking charge. He had laid all 6 letters out on his coffee table. Each of us received an anonymous threatening letter in the past week. Each letter references something that Patricia Hendricks has personally complained about to us in recent months. I think the connection is pretty clear. But we can't prove it, Donna Chen pointed out. She was a sharp-eyed lawyer who worked downtown. Anonymous is anonymous. Without evidence, we're just speculating. What if we go to the police? Amanda Brooks suggested. Her husband Tyler nodded beside her. And tell them what? Donna countered. That someone said our yards are messy. The cops have real crimes to deal with. They're not going to investigate mean letters. These aren't just mean letters, I said. They're threats. Face the consequences, you will regret it. That's threatening language. Marcus is right, Jennifer said. This is harassment at minimum, maybe even intimidation. Michael Torres, a software engineer with a quiet demeanor, had been studying the letters closely. The typing is interesting, he said. Look at the font. It's Courier New, which is kind of old-fashioned, and see how some of the letters are slightly misaligned. This wasn't printed on a modern computer printer. I think this was done on a typewriter. We all leaned in to look. He was right. The letters had that slightly uneven quality that comes from mechanical keys striking paper. Who even owns a typewriter anymore? Amanda asked. Patricia does, Elena Kowalski said softly. We all turned to look at her. The elderly woman had been quiet until now, sitting in an armchair with her hands folded in her lap. I've been in her house for HOA meetings. She has an old typewriter on a desk in her study. She showed it to me once, said it belonged to her mother. The room went silent as we absorbed this information. Okay, that's pretty damning, Tyler said. Old-fashioned typewriter, complaints that match Patricia's personal grudges, anonymous delivery. Come on, it's obviously her. But again, how do we prove it? Donna asked. We can't just break into her house and dust the typewriter for fingerprints. Bill stroked his chin thoughtfully. You know, when I worked for the Postal Service, we had a division that handled mail fraud and threats. Postal inspectors. They're federal agents and they take mail crimes very seriously. If someone is using the mail system to harass people, that's their jurisdiction. These weren't mailed, though, I pointed out. They were just left on our mailboxes. Doesn't matter, Bill said. Tampering with a mailbox is a federal offense, even if you're just leaving something there. Mailboxes are considered federal property. If she's putting threatening letters on or in mailboxes, the Postal Inspection Service would definitely be interested. Hope flickered in my chest. So we call them. We can try, Bill said. I still have some contacts from my working days. Let me make some calls tomorrow. We agreed to keep quiet about our investigation for now. No point tipping off Patricia if she was indeed the culprit. As Jennifer and I walked home that night, the autumn air crisp against our faces, I felt a strange mixture of anger and anticipation. If Patricia Hendricks thought she could terrorize her neighbors anonymously, she was about to learn a hard lesson. Bill came through faster than I expected. 2 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, a postal inspector named Agent Ramirez showed up at Bill's house. Bill had called me, Michael, and Donna to be there for the meeting. Agent Ramirez was a woman in her 40s with dark hair pulled back in a neat bun and an air of quiet competence. She wore a dark blazer with a badge clipped to her belt. Mr. Morrison tells me you folks have been receiving threatening correspondence, she said, settling into a chair in Bill's living room. I'd like to see everything you have. We presented all 6 letters, explaining the timeline and the connection to Patricia's previous complaints. Agent Ramirez examined each one carefully, taking notes on a small tablet. You mentioned these were left on or in your mailboxes, she asked. Mine was taped to the outside of the mailbox door, I said. The others confirmed similar delivery methods. That's Title 18, Section 1702 of the United States Code, Agent Ramirez said. Obstruction of correspondence. It's a federal crime to use a mailbox for anything other than properly posted mail. Add in the threatening nature of these letters and we've got a case worth investigating. She looked up at us. You believe Patricia Hendricks is responsible? We do, Donna said. But we don't have proof. That's my job, Agent Ramirez said. One of the most reliable methods for identifying anonymous letter writers is handwriting analysis. Even with typed text, people often leave distinctive marks, but I'm also interested in this typewriter angle. She turned to Alina, who had joined us partway through. Mrs. Kowalski, you mentioned seeing a typewriter in Miss Hendricks's home. Alina nodded nervously. Yes, in her study, an old manual typewriter. Here's what I'd like to do, Agent Ramirez said. I'm going to take these letters for analysis. I'll also need handwriting samples from anyone who's willing to provide them for comparison purposes. And I'd like to have a conversation with Miss Hendricks. Will you tell her we're investigating her? Michael asked, worried. I'll be discreet, Agent Ramirez assured him. Often in cases like this, the best approach is to request voluntary cooperation. If she's innocent, she'll have nothing to hide. If she's guilty, sometimes people reveal themselves through their reactions. Over the next week, Agent Ramirez worked her investigation quietly. She interviewed each of us in more detail, collecting handwriting samples by having us write out a standard paragraph of text. She also spoke with other neighbors who hadn't received letters, asking if they'd noticed anything unusual. I didn't see the actual confrontation with Patricia, but Bill, who was doing yard work at the time, gave me a detailed account. Agent Ramirez had shown up at Patricia's house on a Tuesday morning, identifying herself and explaining that she was investigating suspicious correspondence in the neighborhood. According to Bill, Patricia had gone pale but maintained her composure, insisting she knew nothing about any threatening letters. Would you be willing to provide a handwriting sample? Agent Ramirez had asked. Patricia had hesitated. Am I being accused of something? Not at all, Agent Ramirez had said smoothly. I'm collecting samples from multiple residents to rule people out. It's routine. Patricia had agreed, though Bill said her hand was shaking as she wrote. Agent Ramirez had also asked about the typewriter, and Patricia had admitted she owned one but claimed she rarely used it. Would you mind if I took a look at it? Agent Ramirez had asked. That's when Patricia had balked. I think I should speak to a lawyer before I let you search my house. That's absolutely your right, Agent Ramirez had said. I'm not searching anything without your permission or a warrant, but I appreciate your time, Miss Hendricks. Bill said Patricia had shut the door quickly after that, and he'd seen her pacing back and forth past her front window for the next 20 minutes. A few days later, Agent Ramirez called me. "Mr. Webb, I wanted to update you on the investigation. I've completed my analysis of the letters and the handwriting samples." My pulse quickened. And while the letters themselves were typed, there are handwritten elements that proved useful. The emphasis marks, those words someone went over with a black marker, those were done by hand. Additionally, some of the envelopes had minor notations in pen on the inside flaps, likely notes the writer made before deciding to leave them on mailboxes instead of mailing them. "So you have handwriting to analyze." "Exactly. And I compared it with all the samples I collected, including Miss Hendricks's voluntary sample." She paused. "It's a match." Patricia Hendricks wrote those threatening letters. I felt a surge of vindication mixed with disbelief. "You're sure?" "Handwriting analysis isn't perfect, but there are multiple distinctive characteristics that match. The formation of her capital letters, the slant of her script, specific connection patterns between letters. Combined with the typewriter evidence, I was able to obtain a sample from another source. I'm confident enough to move forward with charges." "What happens now?" "I'll be coordinating with the U.S. Attorney's Office to determine exact charges. We're looking at mail tampering, potentially stalking or harassment charges, and possibly making threatening communications. Miss Hendricks will be notified and given the opportunity to respond before any formal charges are filed." When I told Jennifer that night, she was quiet for a long moment. "I can't believe it," she finally said. "I mean, I can believe it, but it's still shocking. Why would she do this, over lawn care and garden gnomes?" "Control," I said. "People like Patricia need to control their environment. When she couldn't get us to comply through official channels, she tried intimidation. Well, she picked the wrong people to intimidate." The neighborhood erupted with gossip once word got out about the investigation. I hadn't said anything publicly, but somehow these things always leak. Maybe someone saw Agent Ramirez's vehicle parked outside Bill's house too many times. Maybe Patricia herself had started talking, trying to get ahead of the story. Whatever the cause, by the following week, everyone in Meadowbrook Estates knew that the HOA president was under federal investigation. The HOA board held an emergency meeting to discuss the situation. Patricia, facing potential criminal charges, had the sense to recuse herself from the proceedings. The 4 remaining board members, Frank Garrison, Linda Wu, Robert Palmer, and Yolanda Mitchell, met in the community clubhouse on a rainy Wednesday evening. The meeting was technically closed to general residents, but the clubhouse windows were large, and a small crowd gathered outside to watch the proceedings. I wasn't part of that crowd initially, but Donna Chen called me as the meeting was wrapping up. "Marcus, you need to get down here. The board is asking to speak with you and the others who received letters." By the time I arrived, the parking lot was full. Bill, Michael, Eleanor, Tyler, Amanda, and Donna were already inside, seated in chairs facing the board members. I slipped in and took the empty seat next to Jennifer, who had come straight from picking up Sophie from her after-school program. Frank Garrison, who had assumed temporary leadership of the board, cleared his throat. "First, I want to apologize on behalf of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. The alleged actions of Patricia Hendricks do not represent our values or our commitment to creating a safe, welcoming community." "Alleged," Bill said sharply. "The postal inspector has matched her handwriting." Frank held up his hands. "You're right. I should be more direct. What Patricia did was wrong, illegal, and completely unacceptable." The board voted unanimously to remove her from her position as president, effective immediately. We're also recommending that she be removed from the board entirely, though technically that requires a vote from the general membership. What about the complaints she made? Donna asked. My flower pots, Bill's fence, Marcus's yard, are those still considered violations? Linda Wu spoke up. We've reviewed each case. None of you are in violation of any HOA rules. Patricia was interpreting the bylaws in the strictest, most unreasonable way possible, and in some cases, she was simply making things up. Your flower pots are fine, Donna. Bill's fence is compliant. Marcus, your yard meets all standards. The basketball hoop is allowed, the grass height is within acceptable limits, and garden gnomes are not prohibited by our rules. What about consequences for Patricia beyond losing her board position? I asked. She threatened us. She tried to intimidate us into spending money and time fixing imaginary problems. That's beyond our jurisdiction, Robert Palmer said. The board can remove her from her position, but criminal matters are for the legal system. I understand the postal inspector has referred the case to federal prosecutors. Yolanda Mitchell, who had been quiet until now, leaned forward. I worked with Patricia for 3 years on this board. I feel like I should have seen this coming. She was always intense about rules and compliance, but over the past year it got worse. She became obsessed with perfection, with control. A few of us tried to talk to her about it, but she wouldn't listen. I'm sorry we didn't act sooner. There was something genuine in Yolanda's apology that took the edge off my anger. These board members weren't the enemy. They had been stuck dealing with Patricia's increasingly erratic behavior, probably walking on eggshells to avoid setting her off. We appreciate the apology, Bill said after a moment. And we appreciate the board taking action now, but this has been a stressful experience for all of us. We need assurance that something like this won't happen again. We're implementing new procedures, Frank said. No single board member will have unilateral authority to issue violations or fines. All complaints will be reviewed by at least 2 board members before action is taken. We're also revising our bylaws to clarify what is and isn't a violation, removing any ambiguous language that could be weaponized. It was a start. As the meeting broke up, neighbors came over to shake our hands, offering support and sharing their own stories of Patricia's overreach. Apparently, we weren't the only ones who had been on the receiving end of her zealotry, just the only ones targeted with criminal threats. The federal charges came down 2 weeks later. Patricia Hendricks was indicted on 6 counts of mail tampering and 6 counts of transmitting threatening communications. Each count of mail tampering carried a potential sentence of up to 1 year in prison and a fine of up to $250,000. The threatening communications charges were even more serious, with potential sentences of up to 5 years per count. The story made the local news. A reporter from the Naperville Sun came by to interview me, and I gave a carefully worded statement about the importance of community standards versus harassment. The headline read, HOA President Faces Federal Charges for Anonymous Threats. Jennifer cut it out and put it on our refrigerator, a reminder that sometimes standing up for yourself actually works. Patricia hired a lawyer, a slick-looking guy named Gordon Phelps, who showed up at the courthouse in expensive suits and tried to spin the situation as a misunderstanding. My client is a dedicated community volunteer who may have taken her responsibilities too seriously, he told reporters. She never intended to threaten anyone, merely to encourage compliance with community standards. That argument didn't fly. Agent Ramirez's evidence was solid, and the handwriting analysis was backed up by additional evidence the Postal Inspector's office had gathered. They had even recovered the typewriter from Patricia's house, with her permission this time after her lawyer advised her that fighting a warrant would only make things worse. The typewriter's distinctive characteristics matched the letters perfectly. Specific keys had unique imperfections. The lowercase e struck slightly higher than the baseline, The T had a small chip that left a mark, and the space bar created uneven spacing. It was like a fingerprint. The case moved through the system with surprising speed. Patricia's lawyer tried to negotiate a plea deal, but the U.S. Attorney's Office wasn't inclined to be lenient. Using the federal mail system to commit crimes is something they take seriously, and they wanted to send a message. The trial was set for early February, but it never got that far. In mid-January, Patricia accepted a plea agreement. In exchange for pleading guilty to 3 counts of mail tampering and 3 counts of transmitting threatening communications, the other charges would be dropped, and prosecutors would recommend a sentence at the lower end of the guidelines. I attended the sentencing hearing in late January along with Bill, Donna, and Michael. The federal courthouse in Chicago was an imposing building with high ceilings and marble floors that echoed with every footstep. We sat in the gallery as Patricia stood before Judge Catherine Morrison, a stern-faced woman in her 60s who had a reputation for no-nonsense rulings. Patricia's lawyer made an impassioned argument for leniency. "Your Honor, Patricia Hendricks has no prior criminal record. She's a respected member of her community who made poor choices during a difficult time in her life. She's been under significant stress, dealing with personal issues that affected her judgment. She's deeply remorseful and has already suffered consequences through the loss of her position and her reputation." Judge Morrison listened without expression. Then she turned to Patricia. "Miss Hendricks, do you have anything to say before I impose sentence?" Patricia stood, her hands clasped in front of her. She looked smaller than I remembered, her hair less perfect, her shoulders hunched. "I'm sorry," she said, her voice barely audible. "I was wrong. I let my need for order become an obsession, and I hurt people who didn't deserve it. I can't explain why I did what I did, except to say that I lost perspective. I'm deeply ashamed, and I apologize to everyone I threatened and frightened." It was hard to tell if the remorse was genuine or performative. Maybe it was both. Judge Morrison consulted her notes. "Miss Hendricks, you terrorized your neighbors over trivial matters. You used your position of authority in the homeowners association to single out people whose yards or homes didn't meet your arbitrary standards. And when official channels didn't give you the control you wanted, you resorted to anonymous threats. You violated federal law, and you violated the trust of your community." Patricia's lawyer put a hand on her shoulder as if to steady her. "However," Judge Morrison continued, "I also note that you have no prior record, that you've accepted responsibility by pleading guilty, and that you've already begun to face consequences. The purpose of sentencing is not merely punishment, but also deterrence and rehabilitation." She announced the sentence: 18 months in federal prison, followed by 2 years of supervised release. Additionally, Patricia would be required to pay restitution to each of the 6 victims for costs associated with the investigation and emotional distress, totaling $15,000. She would also be required to complete anger management counseling and community service after her release. It wasn't the maximum sentence, but it was significant. 18 months in federal prison would be no joke. Patricia's face crumpled as the judge finished speaking, and her lawyer had to help her sit down. As we left the courthouse, Bill let out a long breath. "Well, that's that. Do you feel better?" Donna asked. "Does this feel like justice?" I thought about it. "Yeah, actually, it does. She committed crimes and she's being held accountable. That's how it should work." Michael nodded. "And maybe it sends a message to other petty tyrants on HOA boards everywhere. You can't just terrorize people because they don't mow their lawn to your specifications." We went to lunch after that, the 4 of us, at a diner near the courthouse. We talked about other things: work, family, plans for the spring. The ordeal had brought us together in an unexpected way, transforming us from casual neighbors into genuine friends. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, life slowly returned to normal. The HOA board operated more smoothly without Patricia's iron grip. Frank Garrison proved to be a reasonable president, open to dialogue and willing to interpret rules with common sense rather than absolutism. The emergency bylaws revisions were approved by a vote of the general membership, creating clearer guidelines and more accountability. My crabgrass eventually got dealt with, not because anyone threatened me, but because I got around to it on a sunny Saturday in March. Bill's fence remained exactly where it was. Donna's flower pots bloomed beautifully that spring. Michael's kids played basketball in the driveway every evening. Eleanor's grass grew to whatever height it wanted, and Tyler and Amanda's garden gnome stood proudly beside their front steps, a small ceramic middle finger to tyranny. Jennifer and I were sitting on our back porch one evening in April, watching Sophie chase fireflies in the gathering dusk, when she brought up the whole situation. "Do you ever think about why Patricia did it?" she asked. "I mean, really think about it." "I guess she just couldn't stand not being in control," I said, "but it's more than that, isn't it? She threw away her freedom, her reputation, everything over lawn care. There has to be something deeper going on. Maybe something in her personal life that made her fixate on controlling what she could control." "Probably," I admitted. "But at some point, reasons become excuses. We all have stress and problems. Most of us don't commit federal crimes over it." "True." Jennifer was quiet for a moment. "I'm glad you stood up to her. I'm glad you all did." "Me too." Sophie ran up to the porch, slightly out of breath, holding a jar with 3 fireflies inside. "Can I keep them?" she asked. "Just for tonight," Jennifer said. "Then we let them go, okay?" "They need to be free." Sophie nodded seriously and sat down on the steps, watching the gentle pulsing light in her jar. The news cycle moved on, as it always does. By summer, the story of the HOA president who sent threatening letters was old news, replaced by newer scandals and sensations. Patricia Hendricks began serving her sentence at a federal correctional institution in Pekin, Illinois, about 2 hours from Naperville. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that her husband had filed for divorce and sold their house. A young family with twins moved in, and they seemed perfectly nice. I ran into Agent Ramirez one more time at a community event the HOA organized in June, a neighborhood barbecue meant to rebuild community spirit. She had been invited as a thank you for her work on the case, and she showed up in civilian clothes, looking more relaxed than I'd ever seen her. "Agent Ramirez," I said, approaching her by the food tables. "Good to see you again." "Call me Sophia," she said, shaking my hand. "I'm off duty." "I wanted to thank you again for taking our case seriously. A lot of people probably would have dismissed it as a neighborhood squabble." "That's what people don't understand about postal inspectors," Sophia said. "We take mail crimes seriously no matter how small they seem, because the mail system only works if people can trust it. Once you let people use it to harass and threaten others, the whole system breaks down." She grabbed a plate and started loading it with potato salad. "Besides, I hate bullies." Patricia Hendricks was a bully, pure and simple. She used her position to make people miserable, and she deserved to face consequences. "Do you think she'll come out of prison different?" I asked. "Reformed," Sophia considered the question. "Hard to say. Some people use their time to reflect and change, others just get bitter. But at least for the next 18 months, she can't terrorize anyone." We chatted for a while longer, and then she drifted off to talk to other neighbors. I found Jennifer and Sophie by the bounce house, watching kids tumble around in inflatable chaos. Bill was manning the grill, flipping burgers with practiced efficiency. Donna was engaged in an animated conversation with the new neighbors about something legal and complicated. Michael was teaching some kids how to throw a spiral with a football. It was a good day. The kind of day that reminded you why you buy a house in a neighborhood in the first place. Not for the property values or the perfect lawns, but for the community, the connections, the sense of belonging to something larger than yourself. As the sun set, and someone turned on string lights that had been hung between trees, I thought about everything that had happened over the past year. The fear when I first found that letter. The anger at being targeted. The satisfaction of fighting back and winning. The strange friendship forged through shared adversity. Most of all, I thought about the lesson in all of it, that standing up to bullies matters, even when they have titles and authority. That anonymous threats are still crimes. That communities are stronger when people look out for each other instead of tearing each other down. Sophie ran up and grabbed my hand. "Daddy, come dance. They're playing good music." Indeed, someone had set up speakers and was playing a mix of pop songs and old classics. Several neighbors were dancing on the grass with varying degrees of rhythm and self-consciousness. "I don't know, sweetie," I said. "Daddy's not much of a dancer." "Please." She gave me the look, the one with the big eyes that I could never resist. Jennifer laughed. "Go on, Marcus. Show us your moves." So I let Sophie pull me onto the makeshift dance floor, and I danced badly but enthusiastically while my neighbors clapped and laughed. The grass was slightly uneven and probably needed mowing. Someone's hedge was overgrown. There was a garden gnome visible in someone's yard, and it was all perfectly, wonderfully fine. The story could have ended there, but there was one more twist to come. In late August, nearly a year after the first letter appeared on my mailbox, I received an envelope in the mail, properly mailed this time with a stamp and everything. The return address was the Federal Correctional Institution in Pekin. My heart rate picked up as I opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper with neat handwriting. It was from Patricia. "Mr. Webb," it began. "I hope this letter finds you well. I'm writing to offer a more complete apology than I was able to give in court. I've had a lot of time to think over the past months about why I did what I did. My therapist here has helped me understand that I was dealing with severe anxiety and depression after my mother's death. I had always been a perfectionist, but losing her sent me into a spiral where I needed to control everything around me. When I couldn't control the neighborhood the way I wanted through normal channels, I convinced myself that anonymous letters would solve the problem. I see now how irrational and harmful that was. You and the others didn't deserve to be frightened or harassed. Your homes and yards were fine. The problem was inside me, not in your grass or your mailbox or your fence. I don't expect forgiveness, but I wanted you to know that I understand what I did was wrong, and I'm working on becoming a better person. I hope you and your family are doing well, and I hope Meadowbrook Estates is thriving without my toxic influence. Sincerely, Patricia Hendricks." I read the letter twice, then showed it to Jennifer. "What do you think?" I asked. "Is this genuine?" "I think time in prison probably gives you a lot of opportunity for self-reflection," Jennifer said. "Whether it's genuine or not, at least she's taking responsibility. That's more than a lot of people do." I thought about writing back but decided against it. Some chapters need to close completely. Instead, I filed the letter away in a drawer and tried to put the whole thing behind me. September came around again, marking a full year since the ordeal began. The weather turned crisp and beautiful, that perfect autumn temperature where you need a light jacket in the morning but can wear shorts in the afternoon. I was raking leaves one Saturday when Bill walked by with his dog, a golden retriever named Murphy. "Hey, Marcus," he called out. "Yard's looking good," I grinned. "Thanks. I'm trying to keep it from being a disgrace." He laughed. "You know, I was thinking about writing a letter to the Naperville Sun about how our neighborhood handled the whole Patricia situation. How we came together and stood up for what was right. Think it would make a good story." "I think we've had enough publicity," I said. "Let's just enjoy the peace and quiet." "Fair enough." He continued his walk, Murphy straining at the leash to investigate every interesting smell. I went back to raking, but my mind wandered. The pile of leaves grew steadily as I worked, and Sophie eventually came outside to jump in them, scattering my progress and giggling wildly. Jennifer emerged with a camera to capture the moment. "This is nice," she said, snapping photos. "This is what it's supposed to be like." "Yeah," I agreed. "It really is." The rest of that fall passed uneventfully, which was exactly what we all needed. The HOA board continued to function smoothly under Frank's leadership. A few minor disputes came up: a disagreement about holiday decoration timing, a debate about whether the community pool should open earlier next summer, but they were handled reasonably, with dialogue and compromise. In November, we held our annual HOA election to fill the 2 board seats that were up for rotation. Donna Chen ran and won easily. The other seat went to Tyler Brooks, the young father who had been targeted over his garden gnome. Both of them had learned firsthand what bad HOA leadership looked like, and both were committed to doing better. Christmas came and went, then New Year's. On a cold January morning, 13 months after Patricia's sentencing, I got a call from Agent Ramirez, Sophia. "Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up," she said. "Patricia Hendricks is being released early. She qualified for a reduction in sentence for good behavior and completion of various programs." My stomach tightened. "She's coming back to Naperville." "No, actually. Her ex-husband sold their house, as you know, and she doesn't have ties here anymore. I understand she's moving to Arizona to live with her sister. But I wanted you to know, just in case." "I appreciate that," I said. "Do you think we need to worry about her coming back or causing trouble?" "No," Sophia said firmly. "As part of her release conditions, she's prohibited from contacting any of you. If she violates that, she goes straight back to prison. Plus, from what I understand, she's genuinely committed to staying away and starting over somewhere else." After we hung up, I told Jennifer and then called Bill to spread the word. There was a brief flutter of anxiety through our little group, but it faded quickly. Patricia was someone else's problem now, or hopefully no one's problem at all. Life continued. Winter gave way to spring, spring to summer. Sophie turned 8 and had a birthday party in our backyard with a dozen screaming kids and a bounce house. Bill's roses won a prize at the county fair. Donna successfully argued a case before the Illinois Supreme Court. Michael got a promotion. Eliner's grandson came to live with her while he attended community college. Tyler and Amanda announced they were expecting their 3rd child. And me. I finally got around to replacing that section of driveway where the crabgrass had been. Not because anyone threatened me or complained, but because I wanted to. Because it was my house, my yard, my choice. On a warm evening in June, 2 years after the first anonymous letter appeared, the HOA held another neighborhood barbecue. It had become a tradition, a way to mark the anniversary of coming together and reclaiming our community from fear. As I stood by the grill helping Bill with the burgers, I looked around at the familiar faces, the kids running around, the genuine smiles and laughter. This was what a homeowners association was supposed to be. Neighbors supporting neighbors, maintaining reasonable standards without tyranny, creating a place where people wanted to live. "You ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" Bill asked, as if reading my mind. "If we just ignored those letters or quietly complied?" "She would have gotten worse," I said. "Bullies always do when no one stands up to them." "Truth," Bill said, flipping a burger with a satisfying sizzle. Frank Garrison approached the grill with a platter. "How we doing on food? Looks like we've got another wave of hungry people coming." "We're good," I said. "Plenty more burgers in the cooler." Frank nodded, then lingered. "You know, Marcus, I've been thinking, this neighborhood went through something difficult, but we came out stronger." I'm proud of how everyone handled it, especially you, Bill, Donna, and the others who had the courage to take action. We had good help, Bill said, nodding toward Sofia Ramirez, who was chatting with some neighbors by the dessert table. Still, Frank insisted. It would have been easy to just move away or stay silent. You chose to fight, that matters. As the evening wound down and the sun set in streaks of orange and purple, I found myself sitting on our back porch again with Jennifer, watching Sophie catch fireflies just like she had 2 years earlier. Do you ever regret it? Jennifer asked. Fighting back against Patricia, going through the investigation, all of it. I thought about it seriously. No, I said, not for a second. It was stressful and scary and time-consuming, but it was the right thing to do. We stood up to a bully and we won. That's not something I regret. Good, Jennifer said, squeezing my hand. Because I'm proud of you. Not just for standing up to Patricia, but for helping create the kind of community where people look out for each other. Sophie came running up with her jar of fireflies, her face flushed with exertion and joy. I caught 7 tonight, she announced proudly. That's a record, I said. You're getting really good at this. She sat down between us on the porch steps, watching the fireflies pulse with their gentle, rhythmic light. Daddy, why do fireflies light up? They're trying to find each other, I explained. The light is how they communicate, how they find friends and family in the dark. She considered this. That's nice, she said. Everyone should be able to find their friends in the dark. Yes, Jennifer said softly. Yes, they should. We sat there together as night fell completely, watching the fireflies dance across our yard. In the distance, I could hear voices from the barbecue winding down, neighbors saying goodbye, cars starting up, the comfortable sounds of a community at peace. Tomorrow, I would mow the lawn, not because anyone threatened me or because an HOA board demanded it, but because it was Saturday and the grass had grown. Jennifer would plant some new flowers in the garden, Sophie would play in the sprinkler, and life would continue in all its ordinary, beautiful ways. The anonymous letters were gone, Patricia Hendricks was gone, and the fear that had hung over our neighborhood like a dark cloud had dissipated. In its place was something better: trust, friendship, and the knowledge that when threatened, this community had come together and refused to be intimidated. As I carried Sophie inside for bed a little while later, she clutched her jar of fireflies. Can we let them go together? She asked. Of course. We stood on the back porch and Sophie carefully unscrewed the lid. The fireflies hesitated for just a moment, then lifted into the air, their lights blinking as they flew away into the night. We watched until we couldn't see them anymore, tiny points of light disappearing into the vast darkness. Good night, fireflies, Sophie whispered. Good night, fireflies, I echoed. And then we went inside, where the lights were warm and bright, where Jennifer was making tea, where our home was truly ours. Free from threats, free from fear, free from the tyranny of anonymous letters and petty dictators who mistook authority for power. The story of Patricia Hendricks and her campaign of intimidation would become neighborhood legend, the kind of story told to new residents as both a warning and a reassurance. A warning that HOA boards could go wrong if people weren't vigilant. A reassurance that when they did, good people could fight back and win. But for now, on this June evening 2 years after it all began, I was content to simply be home, to tuck my daughter into bed, to sit with my wife on the couch and watch a movie, to exist in the peaceful ordinary that Patricia had tried so hard to disrupt. She had failed, we had won. And Meadowbrook Estates was better for it. The anonymous threats had been matched to her handwriting. The postal inspector had done her job. Justice had been served. And life, beautiful and messy and imperfect, went on. I never saw Patricia Hendricks again. Sometimes I wondered how she was doing in Arizona, whether she had genuinely changed or just learned to hide her controlling tendencies better. But mostly, I didn't think about her at all. Because in the end, she was just a cautionary tale, a reminder that power without accountability leads to abuse, that fear can be used as a weapon, but also that courage and community can defeat both. My yard was never perfect. The grass sometimes grew too long. Weeds sprouted despite my best efforts. The hedge needed constant trimming, and that was okay. That was life. That was real. And as I turned off the lights and headed upstairs that night, I felt nothing but gratitude for the imperfect, messy, wonderful neighborhood we called home. A place where garden gnomes were allowed, where basketball hoops stood proudly in driveways, where fences stayed up and flower pots bloomed freely, and where anonymous threats were met not with compliance but with courage. That was the end of the Patricia Hendricks story, but it was also a beginning, the beginning of a stronger, more united community that had learned an important lesson. That homes are made not just of walls and yards, but of neighbors who stand together when it matters most. And in Meadowbrook Estates, on this quiet street in Naperville, Illinois, that lesson would not be forgotten.